And this is not the last pandemic we're going to have. We need to really put our feet on the ground with this, and it looks like the Missouri Baptist Association has done that by starting up a web page so that those messages can be shared. But this is not the last pandemic we're going to have by a long shot, and this is not the worst one. I'll share with you just briefly something, and then I'll get into my message. Jesus shared something with his disciples while he was still here, and he explained to them that when you see the nations rising up against nations, and you see the armies rising up like a cloud, and I want to tell you there's parallels to this prophecy. Okay, there's a then and back then, and a then in the future. Okay, there came the Roman army. Jesus was crucified when he was 35 years old. In 70 A.D., the Roman army came against Jerusalem. Well, actually, started a little earlier than that, but they came against Jerusalem with a massive, massive army. They literally shut down all their food supplies, and as gross as this is going to sound, women literally ate their children because they had nothing to eat. And they argued over, no, this is mine. This will give you some idea of what they faced. 1.1 million Jewish people, or Hebrews, died in that onslaught. Now, where was the New Testament church? They thought, sure, we have killed the leader, and when we do this, we will stamp out the church forever. Where was the New Testament church? The New Testament church had left. They left town, and they showed up in a town called Pella and Perea, and all across the Middle East. And the New Testament church has been growing and growing and growing ever since then, because God allowed them and encouraged them to leave Jerusalem at a certain time. Now, there's a lot that can be said about that, but that's not what I want to talk about today. So, there's times when things happen when we don't get to be in the building. This building is not church. This is only the church building. You are the church. And so there's times when we will have to remember our songs as best we can and sing them as best we can. And there's times when we'll have to read the scriptures and study them, and perhaps study sermons that's online. But we're going to have to do a lot of things in the future that we have not been accustomed to in the past as a people and as a church. And so, having said that, I would like to turn my message now. And if it's okay, I'm going to step back here so that I can read without turning my back to you. Can the people in the back hear me fine? I mean, I've got more volume if I have to get it. In my message I put together, it says, I have one thing to say, and that is thank God for his blessings. And so today, that's really what I want to say to you is thank God for his blessings. At this point, we're all here, and we're all ready to serve him, and we've all been serving him in our own little sphere. It's not like we ordinarily did, but that's okay. God understands. He put us there. He knows what's going on. I want you to turn to James, the first chapter, if you will. James, the first chapter, verse 1. And I want to talk to you about the joy of salvation. And this is something we need to think about, is the joy of salvation. Remember in Psalms 51:12, David said, speaking to the Lord, return unto me the joy of thy salvation. Whose salvation was that? It belonged to God. He asked him to return unto me the joy of thy salvation. Sometimes we have to come to that place in our lives and we have to say, dear God, return unto me the joy that I have in serving you. Even I might be in Grub Hollow over there, and it's okay. We came to Doniphan a few times to get medicines and whatever, but for the most part, we spend a lot of time there. And Linda and I, we've been looking forward to the day when we could spend time together. And so that's what we've been doing, is spending time together. We've been putting some, she helped me, but I've been putting some messages together on YouTube. They're 10 minutes long, so maybe I learned some discipline there. That's part of my message today. We need to learn discipline, okay? Need to learn discipline on what we're doing. I need to learn discipline on what I'm saying. So, in James, the first chapter, if all goes well, I plan to go through verse 6. I don't see a clock handy right here, but somebody can tell me when we get to an hour, okay? Greg, that's your job. You got the clock on you?
Right there.
It's almost, okay. Can you let me know what time is it now?
It's 20 after.
20 after. Okay, can you let me know when it gets to be 1 o'clock for sure?
Okay.
Just do like this. Do like this. That's not the first time that's happened in this church. Okay? Tom Foster used to get long-winded, and he used the analogy. He said, you know, about the story about the pastor. He would reach in his pocket and he would get a cough drop, and he put it in his jaw when he started preaching. And when the cough drop was gone, well, then he would know to quit. Well, one day he reached in his pocket, and the button on his shirt had fallen off. He got the button. So they got a long message. So for those who don't know who he was, Brother Tom, he was our very first pastor. He was the missionary here that started, that worked to help start the church. But he was our very first pastor. Marvelous man. Oh, and the rest of the story is that Dwayne, our brother, he kind of wanted to go at like 1 o'clock. And so he was talking to Tom about it one day. Tom says, well, you don't have to let me know when time's up. He had a watch that was a pocket watch on a string. So he sat in the back of the church, and when it got to be time, he did like this. Yeah, you got it, Jeanette. So, okay, Greg, so that won't be the first time that's been done in this church, okay? So, God bless you. Thank you for all that you're doing. Let's look at James, the first chapter, verse 1. Jesus, a servant of God and of the Lord Jesus Christ, to the 12 tribes which are scattered abroad, greeting. Notice here now that these 12 tribes at this point had been scattered abroad. My brethren, count it all joy when you fall into diverse temptations, knowing this, that the trying of your faith worketh patience. This is where I was talking about a while ago. With all of you, but especially with our young people and those who are going to be missionaries, you must hone on the patience. You must sharpen those patience and to, how are we coming on that book? You doing all right?
It's coming.
All right, good. Don't rush it. I'll tell you a story about a book one time that was written, but I'm working on that, staying focused right now. If any of you lack wisdom, let him ask of God, that giveth to all men liberally, and upbraideth none, or upbraideth not, and it shall be given him. But let him ask in faith, nothing wavering, for he that wavereth is like the wave of the sea driven with the wind and tossed. So let us take a look now. I made myself a few notes here, and I popped them up in a little bigger font so that I can see them. And so what I want to talk with you about is true religion. What is true religion? True religion. I've addressed one of these on one of my YouTube deals, and I mentioned that there are many religions in the world, and basically they have their place. I didn't say they're not going to have their place in heaven necessarily, but they have their place. They form governments. They satisfy people's needs to meet together and whatever. But Christianity is different. Christianity is different because we worship a risen Savior who's sitting on the right-hand side of God. There were thousands of people, and hundreds for sure, that saw Jesus after he rose from the dead. So, as we think about this, the marks of true religion, what is it? Joy and patience in the midst of trials. when we face trials like the ones we've been facing for the last several months, and we're still going to be facing them, it's not over, not by a long shot, but when we face these trials, we have to have joy in doing so. Joy is what gives our life meaning. If my life is void of joy, then I have no reason literally to exist. You see, Jesus, when he came into my heart, he gave me the joy that passeth all understanding. He gave me the joy to live a life that's separate and set apart from sin, and separate and set apart from the fears of this world. And he can do the same thing for you if you have not accepted him as your personal Savior. So joy and patience in the midst of trials. Think about this in verse 1. Verse 2, my brethren, count it joy when you fall into diverse temptations. We think, oh, I've been tempted. I must be a horrible person, or otherwise this temptation would not come to me. No, you're not a horrible person. Temptation will come to Christian people. Remember I told you about the man who offered me $300,000 if I would squirrel hunt at his marijuana patch? And I told him, I said, you must think you're talking to the biggest fool in the Ozarks. He may have been. But, you know what? I didn't squirrel hunt there, and I didn't get his $300,000, but I didn't want it. That was a temptation. And then he went on to say, but David, he said, everyone has a price. You just tell me what it is. Is it $350,000? Is it $400,000? Is it $500,000? And I said, I don't have a price. Not when it comes to destroying people's lives. I don't have a price. And so that's where we left it. Temptation. He did not tempt me because I was weak, or because I was this or that, or because I had sinned. Temptation comes to us. It comes to you in every form. And I could spend all day talking to you about temptations, and you know what they are. But temptations come to us because we are Christian people, and because we have Christ to sustain us. At the time he offered that to me, I was literally broke. I'm sure that, well, he might have known how much $300,000 was in my world. You know, $300,000 was like 10 million. But still yet, then we have to ask ourselves, you know, what am I willing to surrender for this? What am I willing to surrender for this? Knowing this, that trying your faith worketh patience. But let patience, in verse 4, but let patience have her perfect work, that you may be perfect and entire, wanting nothing. I'm going to give you a dictionary definition here on entire. You know, we use the word entire, but sometimes we may not understand it in its fullest form. Having no element or part left out. Okay, think about this. Having no part or element left out. It's the entire thing, if you're talking about elements or whatever. Having no element left out. Whole, was alone the entire day. Remember I had on text back some weeks ago when I told you I was alone one day, and I went out on the patio, and I was sitting on the patio, and it was a beautiful day, and I just felt moved to sing Amazing Grace. And I just belted out Amazing Grace there on my patio, off out there 30 miles and 20 miles from anybody's town. And I just had a great big time. I felt really warm and good because I sang Amazing Grace that day. It wasn't something you'd want to hear, but I enjoyed it. I'm not that good a singer, but I enjoyed it. It's a total. Their entire devotion to their family also means total. Think about this. You give your total devotion to your family. Your family exists because as mothers especially, but fathers do too, but especially mothers, they give everything so that their children can exist. We actually have, you know, many times in records, we don't have to wait very far on this, mothers actually doing without so their children can have food and can have clothing and can have whatever it is. They provide for their children because it's their entire responsibility. And they suffer loss oftentimes. Think about this. Their entire devotion to their family. early last week when I did the funeral for the baby, you know, I had to realize that this mother had come to a point in life. We all, when we first learned that our wives are pregnant, we start planning, don't we? Especially we guys. We don't have them in kindergarten before they're born. You know what I'm saying? We really do. We'll have them walking and running and talking before they arrive. And I'm sure that mothers do the same thing, and they go into the room planning and putting up colors and fixing the cribs and all, and fixing that room especially for the baby. And then to have all of this come crushing down around you. It's like I told her, I said, you're going to have 3 things specifically and very important. You're going to have medical attention, and you're going to have to heal medically. You're going to have to heal emotionally. You see, her emotions have been wrecked. Not only has her body almost been destroyed, but her emotions were wrecked. And then spiritually, you're going to have to grow. So these are 3 areas that I want you to keep in mind, that you're going to have to replenish him. And that is medically, emotionally, and spiritually. And sometimes we need to do that as well. Even though maybe we didn't lose a child, we have to realize that we've suffered a great loss. So God has the whole and the entire for us. Now, also complete in degree, consisting of one piece. You know, if something is entire, then it's consisting of one piece. This piece of formica here is one piece of formica. You know, if you were to look at it through a microscope, I know that you can see places in between where the molecules join together, the atoms join together. But when we look at this piece of formica here, we see one piece. This is one piece of formica. It's homogeneous. Homogeneous means it's all the same. It's unmixed. It's all the same. Intact. And strove to keep the collection entire. This is what the Bible is telling us here, that James is telling us. But let patience have her work, perfect work, that you may be perfect and entire, that you may be all in one piece. And I know there's been times when I felt like just running outside and screaming, but I got over that pretty quick because I don't run so good anymore. And I don't scream so loud, so it doesn't really matter. But, you know, there's times when it was crying. And so sometimes I would take a walk out around the Persephone bushes and watch the blooms and watch the birds that were in them. And eventually, along later on came, you know, the peach trees that had to be trimmed and pruned back. And then I got a neighbor to trim back some of the Persephone bushes for me because they were growing too vigorously. But as we see in verse 5, if any of you lack wisdom, let him ask of God, that giveth to all men liberally and upbraideth not. I want you to look at this for a moment. If we lack wisdom, right here, okay? I can always use another shovel full of wisdom. Where do I get it? I ask God for it. I ask God for it. We have trying times in our lives. It's times that's economically stressful. When you don't know how you're going to feed the children sometimes. When you don't know how you're going to pay the light bill sometimes. When you don't know how you're going to pay the house payment sometimes. These things are stressful. By the way, last week we had our electric off for 5 days. On the 5th day, we got it back. I was so glad to hear the pump kick on. I went in and turned the hot water on and listened to the on-demand hot water heater kick on. It's like, oh yeah, this is so cool. I turned the light on there above the vanity. It's like, man, this is nice. I've been missing this. Made a pot of coffee. And Greg, I've been making coffee, or Linda and I have, on our Coleman heater, you know. And so it's for like camping. Camping for 5 days when I didn't really want to go camping. Think about this. Verse 5. If ye lack wisdom, let him ask of God, that giveth to all men liberally. He is not measuring this out to me and to you and forgetting everyone else. If you ask God for wisdom, he has promised to give it to you. If you need his promise, look in James, the first chapter, verse 5. He's promised to give it to you liberally, not limiting what he gives. And that braideth not, and it shall be given him. I want to look at the word definition here, the definition for the word upbraideth. You know, sometimes these words, we don't use them much anymore. You don't see a lot of people talking about being upbraided or upbraiding someone else, whatever. But let's just look at it for a moment. Upbraiding means to criticize severely, find fault with, to reproach severely, or scold vehemently. God doesn't do that to me. If I were to ask, and I do, I ask God for wisdom, look at me. You think he couldn't criticize me? You know, me standing before a holy and a righteous God, do you think he couldn't criticize David? Do you think he couldn't scold David? Well, of course he could. I'm a sinner in his sight. I've done nothing worthy of his attention. I've done nothing worthy of his good. The only thing I've ever done was come to the altar in 1966 and I accepted Jesus Christ as my Savior. And that's the only good thing I've ever done. And the rest of it has just been the best I could. But anyway, to upbraid means to criticize severely, find fault with, to reproach severely, scold vehemently. You know, one of the sad things about this is sometimes churches find it necessary that the church can just be growing right nicely and doing very nicely, and then sometimes the pastor decides that it's his responsibility to criticize everyone in church. Have you ever seen that happen? Yeah. You know what he does? When the pastor does that, the pastor literally is killing the church. When he upbraids the church, he's killing the church because he's scolding it vehemently. God doesn't do me that way. Why would I do you that way? This reminds me of a story right quick. Remember the story about the man that owed a great deal? And he went to his master and he said, "Master, I can't pay. Would you please forgive my debt?" And the master said, "Yes, your debt is forgiven." He went back out into the field and there was a man that owed him a little bit. And he went and he got him by the neck and he dragged him up. And he told him, said, "You're going to have to pay me what you owe." This is the man that was standing there that was forgiven a great deal of resources, money and talents and whatever. And now he's holding this man by the neck and you're going to have to pay me every penny. When the good master heard what he did, what did he do? He turned then and he said, "Now you owe me." Why did I tell you this? Because God forgave me of a mountain of sin. How can I upbraid you? How can I scold you and criticize you? How can I be this way with you when God forgave me and saved my wretched soul? And I was doomed for a devil's hell. In verse 6, but let him ask in faith, nothing wavering. For he that wavereth is like a wave of the sea, driven with the wind and tossed. When you ask something of God, you need to believe that he is capable of delivering it. And he is capable of delivering it. I don't have all the answers. And I know there's, even through this coronavirus 19, you know, I've had questions. What about this? What about that? There's a lot of things I don't know about because I'm not a doctor and I'm certainly not an epidemiologist. But I know it's severe. And I know it's serious. And I know we need to take it seriously. And I know that we have two examples on the East Coast and West Coast. On the West Coast, the lady out there that was mayor, she said to her staff, "We've got to shut this city down because we have a horrible pandemic coming and this is bad. I won't tell you what she really said, but it's not appropriate to say in church. They dressed up her words and took those words out and put the ones in that should have been, her staff did, and they sent it to New York so that he could have a model letter. The governor of New York said, we're not closing down, we're going to leave the schools open, we're going to leave the subways open, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. And they did that with the health department from the federal health department saying, close down, close down. Every state saying, close down, close down. And when I'm saying the federal, I'm not talking about, and I'm not talking for and against, I'm not talking about, that Trump didn't make some bad decisions there, saying, well, it will go away. That's not what I'm talking about, so don't mix up. I'm not talking about politics. I'm talking about medical decisions that were made by health people who said, this is serious, and get things shut down. He put it off 2 weeks. In 2 weeks, they had deaths that were unlike anything they had ever seen. And they had their hospitals overwhelmed. And in San Francisco, they didn't have virtually the same number of people, the same setting, but hardly anything. Because someone acted. It's time sometimes for us to act, and act like adults. And when we do that, we have to say, the building is not God's church. This is the house in which we worship. You are the church. I'm a part of the church. So let us remember this. And let us remember this as we look forward to what God has for us. In Psalms 51:12, remember I told you that David said, return unto me the joys of my salvation. I think each one of us can say that. Also now, when I ask you to have faith, what is faith? Faith is a substance of things hoped for, but the evidence of things not seen. Greg, how much time do I have?
Hour and 15 minutes.
Oh, that didn't move, huh?
15.
It's like me. Janelle, what is it? 5 minutes? 3 minutes? All right. But as we look at it, we say faith is a substance of things hoped for. A substance is what? This is something that is a substance. We can look at this and say it has substance. Substance is something we can measure. It has a defined mass. It has a defined size and all. Faith is hard to measure, but we can measure it. How do we measure it? By the way I conduct myself. My salvation and my joy in the Lord shows itself in my conduct. And so it can be measured. Can it be measured with centimeters and inches and things? Not really. But then we measure it by the substance of what we do and what we don't do. Remember earlier I told you there was a man who offered $300,000? I chose not to do that. That's the substance of my faith. Faith is a substance of things hoped for, but the evidence of things not seen. I have not seen God. I have not seen Jesus, but I know they're real. And I know they're real to all of us who are Christians. And I want to say to you, if you haven't accepted Jesus Christ as your personal Savior, please do so. Please do so. Because this isn't the end times necessarily. The end times are coming. This isn't the worst pandemic that's coming. This is not the only pandemic. You're going to see more, and they're going to be more vicious. Because what has the world been trained to do? We have trained everyone who wants to hurt people how to do it. All you have to do is infect a human body and put them on an airplane to New York, and San Francisco, and Denver, Colorado. We have trained them how to do it. I have said from the pulpit in this church, when God is ready, He will bring this nation and every nation in the world to their knees. Amen. I believe that. Amen. I believe that when He brought this nation and every nation in the world to their knees medically, They said, we don't have an answer, and right now we don't have a solution. We don't have an answer to it now. But also, he got them where it hurts. You know where that is? In their pocketbook. The amount of taxes revenue that's going into our federal government is very, very small, because the number of people who's working are extremely small, because we've been ordered to shelter in place. Our states are suffering, our federal government's suffering, the nations of the world are suffering. Am I asking for sympathy for them? No. I'm just telling you that God can do this. God can close down the best armed nation in the world. And he will do it when he's ready. Now, someone might say, did God bring this pandemic on us? I don't know. But he allowed it. He allowed it to happen. And I'm telling you today that there's a lot of things that God can allow happen. I want to encourage you, if you have not accepted Jesus Christ, do so today, please. Come to Jesus if you have not accepted Christ. Accept him as your personal Savior. You will never do anything that's worth more valuable in your life than to accept Jesus Christ. He is more valuable than gold and silver. And he's more valuable than all the land in the world. Jesus Christ is. You see, because now we're also hearing about meat shortages, right? Maybe there might be some. Well, I think our farmers have stepped up through Farm Bureau and different organizations to provide some of that. But we are facing times unlike anything we've ever seen. But this is not the worst of what we will see. May God richly bless you is my prayer. I hope that you've been able to take something from this and realize the joy of our salvation is what it's all about. Being saved is wonderful. That's important. But then the joy of my salvation. Being able to enjoy being saved. And I love that so much. Even if I'm at home over there, I can have joy in my Lord. As we have a song, let's sing